You know, when you see a hashtag like #MeToo just explode all over the internet, it could feel like it came out of nowhere. But what you're actually seeing is the latest chapter in a huge story that's been going on for more than 150 years. So how did we get here? How did we get from women fighting just for the right to own property to a massive, global, digital movement? Well, let's break down this incredible evolution through what are known as the 4 waves of feminism.
Okay, so first things first, you've got to understand that feminism isn't one single monolithic thing. It's not some static rule book that never changes. It's much more like a sprawling, dynamic, and sometimes pretty contentious conversation that has shifted dramatically from one generation to the next. Each new wave builds on, and a lot of times really challenges the one that came before it.
To make sense of this long history, people usually use the metaphor of waves. So think of this timeline right here as our map for this journey. We're going to start with the first wave's fight for just the most basic rights, then right into the second wave's focus on social and personal life, explore how the third wave completely challenged the definition of woman, and finally land right here in the present with the fourth wave, which is happening all around us, mostly online.
All right, let's rewind, way back to the beginning. The first wave, kicking off in the late 1800s, was all about the absolute fundamentals. They weren't trying to shatter glass ceilings just yet. Heck, they were just trying to build the floor. This was a fight for women to even be recognized as legal persons, not just as the property of their husbands or their fathers.
So the focus here was laser sharp, legal equality. You had these towering figures like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton leading the charge. And their argument was simple but powerful. For society to be even remotely just, women needed the most basic tool of a democracy, the vote. So they fought for suffrage, for property rights, for the simple recognition of women as equal citizens under the law. But right from the get-go, things got more complicated. Sojourner Truth, a former slave and an absolutely incredible advocate, delivered this famous speech where she basically challenged the whole movement. That question, "Ain't I a woman?" It forced this really early and critical look at who the movement was actually for. It put the intersection of race and gender on the table from the very start, pushing back against what was, at the time, a primarily white, middle-class focus. So fast forward a bit. The vote is won, which is huge. But then a whole new generation comes along in the 1960s, and they basically say, wait a minute, we're not done yet. This is the second wave. And they argued that real equality wasn't just about what's written in the law books. It was about culture, work, and what happens behind closed doors. Their rallying cry was revolutionary. The personal is political. And this is where the floodgates really open. The scope of the fight just explodes. You've got thinkers like Betty Friedan, whose book The Feminine Mystique just blew the lid off the myth of the happy homemaker. You have activists like Gloria Steinem broadening the focus to equal pay, reproductive freedom, and really challenging that assumption that a woman's only role was in the home. They dragged issues like domestic violence and sexual harassment out of the shadows and right into the public square.
And then you get this idea from the French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, and it is an absolute game changer. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. The idea here is that femininity and all those gender roles aren't just biological destiny. Nope. They're actually taught. They're constructed by society. And that was radical, because if gender roles are created, well, that means they can also be recreated, or maybe even dismantled entirely.
Okay, so as we roll into the 1990s, we hit the third wave. And you can really think of this as a reaction to the second wave. A new generation of feminists grew up with the victories that were won, for sure, but they also saw the limitations. They felt like the second wave sometimes talked about a single, universal, female experience. And for this new, diverse generation, that just wasn't their reality.
So this wave was all about blowing up the idea of a single way to be a feminist and embracing complexity. It celebrated reclaiming your own identity on your own terms. This meant focusing on everything from body positivity to critiquing how women were represented in the media. But probably the single most important and powerful concept to come out of this whole era, the one that would change everything, was intersectionality. So this term was coined by a brilliant scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw, and intersectionality is her way of explaining that you can't understand discrimination by just looking at one thing at a time, like gender, in a vacuum. Her point was that a black woman's experience of the world, for example, isn't the same as a white woman's because her race and her gender intersect. They overlap to create a completely unique set of challenges. This really puts that shift into perspective, right? Where early feminism often focused on a single axis, basically men versus women. An intersectional focus provides a much more multi-layered analysis. It shows how power and discrimination work across all these different overlapping parts of who we are. It's just a much more complete picture of how the world actually works.
And if that wasn't enough to chew on, the third wave also gave us this mind-bending idea from the philosopher Judith Butler. It's called gender performativity. And the radical idea here is that your gender isn't something you are deep down inside, like some internal essence. Butler says it's something you do. It's a script that society hands you from birth, a performance that you repeat every single day through your actions, your clothes, your way of speaking.
And that leads to this huge, powerful question that gets right to the heart of what the third wave was wrestling with. Is gender what you are, or is it what you do? Because think about it. If gender is just a performance, can we perform it differently? Can we completely rewrite the script?
And all of this brings us, well, right up to today, to the fourth wave. And this wave is, without a doubt, defined by technology. The internet and social media have completely transformed what activism even looks like. They've made it more decentralized, more global, and more immediate than anyone could have ever imagined.
Yeah, the front lines of this fight, they're on our phones, our laptops, our social media feeds. Remember how we started with #MeToo? That's a perfect example. Hashtag movements like #MeToo and #TimesUp use social media to build this global solidarity, literally overnight, holding power to account in a way that was just unprecedented. And this era, building on the foundations of the third wave, is defined by its deep commitment to intersectionality, a central focus on transgender rights and inclusion, and a direct confrontation with the online misogyny that is so rampant.
So, when you look back at this whole journey, what's the big takeaway? I think it's that the history of feminism isn't some finished story with a neat little conclusion. It's a living, breathing, constantly evolving dialogue. It is, truly, an unfinished conversation. I mean, you can see the whole progression right here. The movement began with the fight for the most basic legal rights. Then, it evolved to question our most fundamental social roles. From there, it started to redefine the very concept of identity itself. And now, in the fourth wave, it's connecting people and ideas on a global scale through technology. It's pretty clear that each wave has answered some questions while raising entirely new ones. It's a story of progress, of backlash, and of constant reevaluation. And all of that leaves us with one final big question. After all this change, what issues will define the conversation for the next generation? What will the fifth wave even look like?